Guys, so today we are going to talk about memory tracking infra that is present in Gluster, and also, if time permits, we'll also look at the IO threads accelerator, how it works. It's a small accelerator. I thought I will start complete that also as part of this. So, why do we have memory tracking information infra in GlusterFS is the main thing that we need to discuss. As you guys know, GlusterFS is written in C, so we have seen that doing Valgrind and doing all these other kinds of infra, using other kind of infra to find memory leaks was pretty slow because sometimes we've seen that the memory leaks only happen in some production environment, in some sort of you know error situation, or something that is not something we expect. It was not easy to debug such problems without the information about what is it that is leaking. So that is where we rolled out our own memory tracking infra in Gluster. We also have an infra called state dump, which will actually print out the current usage of different data structures, using which we can find what is the memory that is leaking, what is something that is looking like abnormal based on the number of allocations, etc. So the other part that we will discuss is IO threads, why they are needed and how they are implemented in Gluster. So let's start with the memory tracking infra. I think this is a good illustration of what happens in GlusterFS. So every time you allocate a structure, which is the actual data, you add a header information and trailer information about so that you can store something extra, just like malloc and so when you do a malloc, you have to tell the size, but when you do a free, you don't have to tell the size, because at the time of malloc itself it will add some header to the memory saying this is the amount of memory it is allocated, and it will give you a pointer from here. So when you call a free, it will decrement the pointer, read the size, and then do a free. So that is how malloc and free works. Something similar is going to happen even with Gluster. So every time we do a data allocation, we will add some headers, and we'll add some trailer also. But the allocation function will actually return a pointer to this actual data. So now that we have this information, what should we store in the header? So that is what we call as a memory accounting header, which stores a bunch of information about what is the owner, in the sense of which translator is allocating, what is the current number of allocations. These kinds of information get stored in the header. So trailer, we just add some magic number, so that we, like when we look at a core or something like that, we can figure out whether the data that is getting accessed is valid or not. So if it has that magic trailer, then you know that this data is valid. If it is garbled up, then you know it is an invalid memory. So that is one more reason why these things are written to the actual data. So let's look at the code. So this whole thing, okay. First, you are able to look at this, like able to see?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's first go to accelerator T. So accelerator has memory account init function. Okay. This is used for memory accounting inside any Xlator. So you can register a function pointer which will be called at the time of creating the Xlator. So I'll show that in AFR. All right. And the other thing is the yeah. So this is another structure. This is the here. This actually will have the header. So header is a little bit different that we will see later. But each translator will keep a memory accounting record for each of its types. So each Xlator will define some number of times that it wants to track. Then this ref account is like memory management just for this structure, and this is the actual record per type. So the way it works is you will say what is the type and what is the size, current size, maximum size, total number of allocations done so far, and what is the maximum number of allocations that were done so far, and number of allocations that are there at the moment. So this lock is to be able to do this in a synchronized manner. So these are the main structures. So we can look at something like I think. Yeah. So when you are initializing the translator, it will first call this memory accounting init. So when Xlator init gets called is something that we covered in one of the earlier sessions, I think, where when the graph gets loaded in when the wall file based graph is getting loaded, it will create these translators and init will be called on them. So let's look at .c, which has this memory account. Okay, so this is the function pointer that it is registering. So this is like the size of the number of structures that it wants to grab. So each Xlator will create a file like AFR memtypes.h. I think there is such a thing for each Xlator which is trying to do. We can probably look at that. Maybe DHT memtypes also is there. Yeah, so each Xlator will store something like this. Okay. All right. In this accounting, so you can enable or disable. At the moment it's all enabled. So you have to create the size for the structure and you will initialize all of them with 0. So this is like the initialization. Okay. Now that we have this available, oh yeah, one more thing that we can probably look at is this number. So it does not start with 1. That is because we have these common Xlator non-Xlator specific common structures that get handled at a I mean, like these numbers are given in the common library like libglustrefs. So it is in glustrefs memtypes.h. So if AFR creates something like let's say sync task, so the number for that gets picked from here. Okay, so that is the thing. And now that we have this, how does Kelloc and Free like how are they changed to store information in these structures? That is what we'll look at next. So let's look at this GF Kelloc. GF. So okay. So anytime somebody calls gfklog, they'll always mention this enum that we defined in that memtypes.h, whatever is the data structure that we are creating, so that it gets added correctly to this structure. So when we call this macro, it is also doing this stringifying this data that is coming here. So even the string of this text also gets added to the structure. So we'll look at that one. So when we do a GFK log, so yeah, so this is that string. We also get the size is like your normal kellogg's, whatever size you're asking for. Type is this actually enum type, and this is like your normal Kellogg. You try to get the number of elements also, right? That one. So if the memory accounting is not enabled, you just do a Kellogg and that is it. Otherwise, you create some extra data, like just like I was mentioning in the picture, there is a header size and there is a trailer size. You add both of them, and after the allocation is done, now you have to store some extra information. So let's see what happens here. So first thing is like this memory accounting record, which we have seen, which has this information about the type of the string, maximum number of allegations, etc. So that gets manipulated here. So what happens here is you get the record. If the type string hasn't been set so far, you set that also. Then because we are allocating, we are incrementing this size. Then the number of allocations gets incremented, number of total allocations gets incremented. If the maximum size at the moment is greater than whatever has seen so far, that gets updated. Similar for number of allocations also. All right. Then you actually add some the header, which is like the type memory accounting record, the structure pointer, and so it will do a header prepare. So yeah. Okay, one second. This header is like the initial part of the same memory that we are passed. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this PTR is the one that got allocated, which is being treated here as a header because that is the starting anyway. Okay. Now in the, so we are preparing this header. We are setting all this type. What is the memory accounting record? Not the record. So memory accounting structure itself, which has the information like all this information will be there. Okay, and we also, I think, store the XLA. Okay, so this header magic is these like special magic numbers, and we also add the trailer magic. I believe there is supposed to be one XLater also. That's not there. Okay, that's not necessary because we just need to do a decrement in GF3. Okay, so this is GFK log. After this is done, okay, GF3 is the function to do the free. And here we actually get the header pointer from the given pointer by decrementing the pointer based on the memory size. And then, so okay, so here there is nothing with it. Yeah, so the decrement happened here basically. We are checking whether the trailer magic is there or not. This is to identify any memory corruption. So at the time of free, we are going to decrement some of the things that we have incremented. Let me put that up. So at the time of allocation, we are doing this, which is like incrementing the size and incrementing the number of allocations and total allocations, etc. Here we are going to decremental. Okay, so there is like some extra logic to handle last deallocations, etc. But the most of these is your normal stuff. There is like if the debug flags are enabled, which are enabled for running the test regression suite, you also do some extra stuff so that you kind of know what is correct and what is wrong. It is easier to identify the problems is there, because C lets you not see libc actually doesn't invalidate the data, so that even if you do a read after free, sometimes it will work fine. So things become more predictable if we do the invalidation while we are doing the while we are running the tests. So this is how the records get manipulated based on for each of the types. So every time you do a GF KLOC, you are telling what is the data type, and every time you do a GF free, the numbers get the numbers get decremented. So now all this information needs to be dumped in state dump. So state dump.c, is this the one? Yeah. So every time we do a state dump, it will call this dump mem accelerator mem info. Okay, which will give some information. We will actually look at a sample state dump. So it will add what is the memory usage, basically everything that we have been storing in this Excel memory accounting, right? It will start dumping that information, like, what is the size, what's the number of allocations, max size, max number of allocations, and total allocations. So this is how we can figure out what is the current state dump. So let's actually look at this in action. Okay. So when we do a state dump, this is the file where which gets generated by this process. We can do one for any of the GLUSTEPS processes. Okay, so as we can see, like, this is like your global process usage, which has like the number of types, and for each of the types it will show like what is the number of allocations, then what is the maximum size, what is the max number of allocations, total number of allocations. So we were looking at AFR, right? Oh, did I not create okay, so this is like plain replicate, plain distribute one, I think. So let's see if any DHT stuff. Yeah, so DHT ones are there. So the number of types are these many, and for each of these things, like if it is like, du underscore t, for each structure you kind of know what is the current usage. So once we have this information, it is easy to figure out if there are any leaks. So very recently, I was able to debug one such problem using the same thing, which is this one. So in this, the person who I spoke to on Slack, I asked that person to take a state dump and provide that information. I figured out that it is happening in the locks translator. So I just wrote a sample program to do a lock and unlock. And when I ran it in a loop, then I was able to find that there is a bug, and this was the issue. So it makes things really easy to debug even when things are happening in production, because you are able to introspect the process internals. So you don't really need to. Basically, it gives you hints to move forward with the with identifying the issue. So yeah, so this is what I have for memory tracking information. Are there any doubts so far? Oh man, this is crazy. It is going in like recursion. Yeah, guys, any doubts?
Yeah, so if you want to get the complete, like total memory allocated for that process, client process, so if you add the memory size in from all the sections, so will it give the accurate answer? Or
No. So that for that we also store this the malinfo structure which we get from this is like a libc function. So this actually has the the normal process memory usage. So this will
okay.
have the information that you are looking for. This is more in the sense of is something that we wrote ourselves to figure out the uh, to pinpoint where the memory leak is stemming from. Because for example, in this issue that I was showing, right, we were able to find that this issue, the number of logs, the log structure actually belongs to client translator. So it basically tells you which translator is a problem and which is the data type. There are only so many places where things get allocated and deallocated. So you can figure out what the place of allocation deallocation is. So you can kind of come up with a test case which can lead to a problem. So that's how it helps. But there are no I'm like it's we don't track the entire memory, because there are these RPC and all these libraries that we use, which use their own which use libc, right? So we can't account for the memory that gets allocated in the libraries that we use. So if there is a memory leak in the libraries that we use, then there is a problem. Yeah. But so far, at least we haven't seen such a thing happen. In at least my experience, we have only seen one in malloc itself, that is in libc. This happened like maybe 4 or 5 years back. Yeah, so only one bug in libc that we were able to find. So when so many threads are trying to allocate and deallocate, some memory was getting corrupted, and we were able to find that it is happening from libc. And because it was Red Hat, there were developers for everything, so they fixed it. But yeah. So
Okay,
any other questions? Yeah.
So
Any
is
other
the
question?
profile command uses similar structure or infra, or it's totally different?
The profile Glasswall profile is it's a different data structure that IOStats translator maintains. So I will go through that translator also in future. So I'll let you know. I mean, it will be covered in a future session is what I'm trying to say. Something similar, basically everything that we need to monitor, we have built in infra. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other doubts? Oh man, did I hit record? I hit record, right? Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Okay. All right, then I'll move to IO threads. Okay, so why did we start with IO threads? Initially, what we have is like every time So basically the brick process is going to come up with a port that it is going to expose, which gets communicated by GlusterD to the brick to expose one port for connecting. And all the clients which ask GlusterD for port map information, they get this port. So clients connect to the brick. So that is something that we covered in maybe one session back, I think. So what ends up happening is if you only have like one event loop thread and GlusterFS being the file system, and all file system IO at the moment, at least until IO uring comes in, is like a synchronous system call. You have to wait until the file system, underlying file system like XFS, ext4, etc. Until they respond, the thread will be blocked. So you can't have just a single thread that takes care of everything. So you need to have a pool of threads, and the implementation for pool of threads in GlusterFS is IO threads. There are now more iterations on it, but I've chosen to talk about the one that is in production. There are some future enhancements that may replace IO threads in future. But at the moment, I'm not covering that part because it is not in production. So yeah, so this IO uring implementation and thread pool implementation, I think the thread pool implementation it is performing better than IO threads in some cases, but not in some others. So it is not enabled at the moment. It's disabled by default rather. So IO uring at the moment, I don't know how many of you guys know, but the short description is IO uring makes your system calls asynchronous. And Zavi was telling me that you can even give priorities to the IO that you're submitting. So it can essentially completely replace IO threads if that happens, because all these users, the FOP switching from one thread to another thread, the locality of memory going away, etc., all these problems will get solved if we can use IO uring in the future whenever the kernel with all these features lands. Okay, so let's just jump right into the code. This is actually, it's small slides. There's nothing else. Most of the code is also easy. This is like one of the easiest translators to get into. It's only one file also. It's not big. Just this is the only file, and then there is a header file. That's all. So let's look at some of the structures here. So the client context, okay, let's first start with the configuration, which is your so in it, you basically have all these configuration that happens, which you can give options like what is the number of thread counts, high priority threads, how many low priority threads, normal priority, etc. So this is like a priority based one, the thread pool implementation. And if at the moment there is no rate limiting or anything, so there is a possibility for starvation that we specifically see for any of the self-heal and rebalance processes. So there is an effort to change this one, but at the same time there is IO uring that is coming in, so we are still trying to figure out which one to choose. But yeah, so the IO thread, this IOTConf structure actually stores this what is the current number, so what is the maximum number of threads that are allowed, and these are like the limits that we actually set. All this information will be there in this structure. So basically, this is any accelerator will have something called as like const structure, which is like accelerator specific data on both the running data and the configuration that we have. So for example, this current count is like a running data. As and when the threads get spawned, this gets incremented. As and when the threads die, this gets decremented. Okay, so we will look at what happens when any of the threads, sorry, when any of the FOP is wound into IO threads. Right. So let's look at some of the FOPs. If we, okay, let me do this. We will see a similar pattern for everything. So any FOB that you see will eventually call into this macro with the appropriate arguments that are coming in this FOB. And the IoT underscore FOB macro will actually create a stub out of it. So stub is a data structure that is present in GlusterFS, in which you can store what is the function to call in future and what is the whatever are the arguments. So we can actually look at, for example, FOP lookup stuff. Okay, so this is like the macro way of saying what is the FOP that is coming. So this name is the one that is passed. For example, for this fsync, we are passing fsync. So this gets replaced with fsync, FOP fsync stuff. So let's look at FOP fsync stuff. So we create a stub. We look at the structure. So it's like a big structure, which is like a union of calls and callbacks. Both of them are there. Okay. So the data that we have gets stored in this structure. Okay. Basically, we are assigning whatever is the fsync function that needs to be called whenever the FOP is ready to be executed. Apart from that, we are also storing the arguments, which is like, you know, the args, the FD and the dictionary that is getting passed, and also this data sync flag. Second. Oh, I think I goofed up. 1 second. I think I said something wrong. So I think the union is just for the function pointers, I think. Yeah. Union is for these function pointers. So these are all, this is like a function pointer basically. Like the type of the function that can be assigned to the function. And you can also choose to delay doing the callback also. So basically, the stub gets used for pausing FOP or pausing the callback so that it can be sent later. So the default args seems to have the information that we want. So I think this is like, instead of union, all the structures that can ever be used is just one gigantic structure. Same thing with the callbacks also. Same thing. Okay. So it gets populated in this. Once you have this done, this also has a list. Also has a list somewhere. Yeah, so it has a list head. So you can add this stub to a list. That's what will happen. So it will. So all the FOPs are calling this IoT underscore FOP macro, and that macro calls IoT schedule. And we have hard coded what FOP is what priority. So like if it is internal process like georep or self-fill daemon or rebalance, its PID will be negative. So for all of those things, we set the least priority because idea is to not interfere with the IO, active IO in your production environments. So it has both pros and cons, which is that your IO from your production will not be impacted, but your activities may be extremely slow. Generally, all the lookup stat, all these kinds of frequent inode read operations will have high priority. Anything that is modifying generally tend to have lower priority. So we can actually figure out, like, given a fob, what is the priority, and for your workload, if something is not according to your liking, you can change it also, but then you'll have to build your own class surface. But yeah, maybe this can be given as a configuration also, but so far nobody complained about these kinds of things. So yeah, so this one will give you the priority for your fob. Once you get the priority, you will call the IoT schedule with that priority for this stuff. So here we will actually look at the, so there is this thing called NQ, right? For every priority, we have oh, there is a client context also. 1 second. Okay, so there is a per client thing also that is happening here. But yeah, so each of these contexts, let me show this one. So there is a list of clients, and then there is a list of requests that where it is getting added. And there is per client, there is like, if you have high, normal, low, and least, there are 4 such queues basically, lists which are nothing but queues. So you basically enqueue them in that. Okay. And you also increment the queue sizes. So this is to make sure that no one client can completely take over your IO bandwidth. So this basically, this kind of gives some form of round robin for your clients. Basically, for all the clients, you will get some slice of execution. So to maintain that, there is a list of clients, and for each such client, you are adding this. Then there is a like, how the IO processing gets handled will become a bit more clear when we look at the dequeuing part, because here it is just adding it to the client context. Okay, now IO thread scale is where it will see if the number of threads that are present can handle the number of requests that are present. So if you need to scale the number of threads, like if at the moment, if the current count is less than the scale that you need, you will start new threads. So that is what is happening here. it will start a new thread. Okay, so once this, okay, yeah, these threads are going to process these requests that we are actually enqueuing. So let's look at, yeah, so basically this completes the form. Once it sets the schedule, if there are no errors, this is it, its job is done. Now we will go to the IoT worker. So each IoT worker, when it wakes up, it will wait until the queue size is non-zero, which is generally the case if you have active IO. So this is like when the thread is no longer required, it will die. This can happen. So every accelerator, once it if it is not processing any IO for the idle time, so this is a configurable value. We can look at this one. Idle value. Fine. Default value is 126. So yeah, 2 minutes. If for 2 minutes, if there is no IO, it will die. And until, as long as it is not the minimum number of threads that need to be run. So I think the minimum number of threads is 1, I think, yeah. Minimum number of threads is 1. So that many will keep running. Yeah, so the dequeue is the main function that gives you the stub that you have pushed into the queues to execute. So call resume is the one that will actually if it is a wind call, it will wind. If it is an unwind call, which is like the callback, it will do a unwind basically. But in IO threads, it is only used for winding, so that's what will happen. So once you get the stub, you just call a resume on this stub. So the main thing is to figure out how this IoT dequeue works. So every time it is taking the first client from the list of clients that are there. If the client is if the client does not have, so by the way, so these clients are all the clients that are connected to the server that are active in this graph, in this brick graph. So if there are no requests, there is nothing to do. You just go back and be done. Otherwise, for that client, you basically take the whichever one has the highest priority. Like if there are any high priority ones, you get that one. Otherwise, oh, sorry, this is per priority. I think yeah. You are already giving the priority. Okay, sorry. This I goofed. So when you are launching the thread, it actually has there is a priority. Okay, so this is 1 second. Okay, no, sorry, this I got confused, but it's correct only. So I thought, so basically in IO threads, you can launch threads per priority basically. So you can say these number of threads for low priority, these number of threads for least priority, like that we can configure it. I thought the thread itself will have that information, but no, I was mistaken. So it will take the request from the, yeah, okay, now this all makes sense. So as you can see, there is like a for loop now. This is looping over the priorities that we have. So for each priority, it is going to do the same for each client's request. So the way it is working is, at the time of enqueuing, for each client, there is an array of lists, which is like an array of queues. The array represents the priority order. And when we are trying to dequeue, we are going over that array. So if there are any high priority tasks, that is the first one you will execute for that client. If all the high priority requests in that list or queue is done, then you go to the next priority. So that is what is happening here. And every time you dequeue from one client, you do this rotating of the left, which is like, this is like a circular list. So you are rotating so that you will start handling the next client's IO. So that is what is happening. So this is to make sure that one client won't overwhelm all the other clients. So this is to prevent starvation from one client taking over the complete IO. So that is what is happening. So in a sense, in IO threads, per client, you are processing IO in the order of priority, and across clients, we are doing a round robin to prevent client starvation. So that is what is happening. But you can still have starvation based on the priority of the same client. In the same client, if you have too many high priority IO like lookups or something like that, reads or writes may starve. So based on your workload, you will have to increment the number of threads to figure out what is the optimum configuration for your setup. So that is one thing that happens in IO threads. So yeah, this is mostly what happens in IO threads. I don't know whether this was clear, because I also was a bit confused about the priority. But please ask any questions that you have. I can clarify.